If you live in Georgia or you know someone who does, listen up, let them know because you could have a very real chance of impacting an incredibly important election. Or because if voters, they sit out of this election that a lot of people don't even know is happening, energy companies are gonna keep writing the rules, they're gonna hike up your bills, overbuild for profit, and lock Georgians into decades of higher costs. And you're crazy if you think it ends with Georgia. And a lot of people don't know about this because it's a special election for two members of Georgia's Public Service Commission. Right? That's a sentence that just, it makes a number of people's eyes glaze over, right? You hear Public Service Commission, but also, that's what they're counting on. But really, I beg you to lock in, and this is gonna be worth your time. Right, so in order to understand why these two races are so damn important, you need to know what the Public Service Commission, or PSC, actually does. And so at the very top level, a PSC is a state-level government agency that regulates essential public utilities, things like electricity, gas, water, right? And sometimes they have different names like Public Utilities Commission, but every state has some version of this. And as far as why we need these agencies, it's because most public utilities are natural monopolies. And while we normally think, monopoly is bad, this is actually in the public interest, right? Energy utilities, like for example, power companies, they require tons of infrastructure that costs billions and billions of dollars to build and operate. You've got all the different power lines, the plant substations, the control systems. So it's way more efficient and cost effective for everyone to just have one system. But in order to keep utility monopolies from doing the bad shit that monopolies can do, you need some kind of regulator to protect the public, which is where PSCs come in. And PSCs, they do it all. They approve how much energy utilities can charge their customers, ensure safety and reliability, and implement renewable energy projects and efficiency programs to save power, right? And they also greenlight infrastructure projects like new power plants and set rates for how much money utilities are allowed to make from their investments in those projects. So what we're talking about are incredibly powerful agencies that shape energy and environmental policy in each state and oversee a multi-billion-dollar market. Now with that, these commissions, they also vary dramatically from state to state, right? They range in size from 3 to 7 seats, and in the vast majority of those states, those seats are nonpartisan and filled by the governor or legislature. But there are also 10 states that allow voters to elect their commissioners, and all of those elections are partisan, making candidates run as Democrats or Republicans. And in Georgia specifically, there are 5 partisan commissioners who are elected by voters to serve 6-year terms, right? And also, the reason that Georgia's having this special election is very important to keep in mind, and that's because it stems from a lawsuit that challenged the process that the state uses to elect its commissioners. Right? So each of the 5 commissioners represents a different district in the state, but when one of them goes up for election, everyone votes in a statewide election, not just the district they represent, which then also explains why all 5 of the current commissioners are Republicans, even though Georgia is a purple state with some large blue cities like Atlanta. And so in 2020, a group of Black voters filed a lawsuit arguing that the statewide elections diluted their voting power and denied them the ability to pick a candidate of their choice. And that, it resulted in years of ongoing legal back and forth that we're not going to really get into. But what you do need to know with that is because of the litigation, Georgia's Republican Secretary of State canceled the PSC elections in 2022 and 2024. And then last year, Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed a law resetting the schedule for all PSC elections and allowing all the Republican commissioners to stay in their seats well after their terms expire. And so as a result, there are 2 PSC elections this year. One for the seat in District 2, which covers the eastern part of the state, including Athens and Savannah, and the other is for District 3, which contains much of the Atlanta metro area. But then also, you've seen Republican lawmakers getting a ton of backlash for planning these races outside of a usual election year. Right, turnout is already traditionally low for PSC races nationally because these commissions are so technical and bureaucratic, and very few people actually know what they do or why they're so important. But also, the turnout's even lower when there aren't other major races on the ballot driving out voters. And so it's part of the reason why I'm bringing these special elections to your attention. These races could be easily swayed by a few thousand more people voting. I mean, honestly, maybe even just a few hundred. I mean, the turnout for PSC primaries was literally just 2.8% of all 7.4 million active voters in the entire state of Georgia. But again, that's as these elections are incredibly important and have super high stakes for a number of reasons, right? And what you've seen is over the last few years, the Republican-controlled PSC has implemented several controversial moves that critics say prioritize the financial benefits of energy companies over consumer interests. But one of the biggest sticking points has been the major rate increases on customers. And according to reports, the PSC approved requests by Georgia Power, the state's largest energy provider, to increase rates 6 times just in the last 2 years, citing increased costs of fuel and electricity driven by inflation. And those price hikes have increased average customer rates by $43 per month, or $516 more each year compared to just 2 years ago. Also, the PSC has increased the amount of money that energy utilities can make from their investments in new projects. And so that's driving up their rate of return to nearly 12%, higher than the roughly 8 to 10% that's standard across the country. Right? And that's also significant because it increases incentives for energy companies to build more infrastructure. Right? So the more that they invest in new building projects, the more money they get in return from their investments. And while yes, that may be a good incentive to have when more infrastructure is needed, it also creates a world where utilities want to build more even when it's not really necessary. Now that said, plenty of new builds are needed to revitalize infrastructure and keep up with the new demand. But when the PSC approves those builds, it can create decades of higher prices for consumers who help cover those costs. And that's why it's so important to have a PSC that only approves necessary projects and keeps the the corporate interests in check. But what you have are major concerns that Georgia's Republican commissioners are just not doing enough to regulate energy companies amid the ongoing AI boom. Right, Georgia, I don't know if you know this, has already become one of the leading states for new construction of AI data centers, which require a metric fuck ton of energy. And in order to meet that demand, new energy infrastructure needs to be built by the energy utilities, who, of course, profit from those builds. AI data centers are a major cash cow for utilities. Period. But with that, you've got experts saying that the data center boom, it could also be a great excuse for utilities to overestimate the amount of infrastructure that they actually need so they can overbuild and make more money. Now with that, you have the Georgia PSC and major utilities saying they won't let residential consumers pay the increased costs of new data center infrastructure. But that is, you have many, many others, including advocates, saying they're highly skeptical there, saying that the commissioners aren't actually doing their jobs, and they're accusing them of doing whatever the utilities want instead of pushing back against expensive builds or overly optimistic growth forecasts. Right, and with that, saying that they haven't implemented proper safeguards to protect consumers already grappling with increased rates, which many suspect are actually driven at least in part by the AI data center boom. And so these elections are a chance to break up a commission that many feel just isn't acting in the best interest of the people that it represents, all while also creating a balance to the power of the all-Republican PSC to better reflect the views of a purple state. Right? And so, for example, in District 2, the Republican incumbent Tim Echols is being challenged by Democrat Alicia Johnson. And Johnson has criticized the PCS's rate increases and demanded more accountability for data centers. And then in District 3, Commissioner Fitz Johnson is facing off against Peter Hubbard, a Democrat who claims that PSC hasn't done enough to keep bills down or protect consumers from data center costs. And hey, if you want to know more about the candidates, I'm going to link to that down below, but I'm going to provide voting resources down below as well. You need to vote. Early voting, it's already begun. It's going to continue until Halloween. I'm going to vote tomorrow morning. And if you're not able to early vote before then, the actual election is Tuesday, November 4th. Again, I'm going to link to voting resources. You can also go to sos.ga.gov. Right, find your polling place. Sometimes the early voting place is different than the day of election voting place, but this is incredibly important. And also, whether you're in Georgia or not, please send this video, the idea of it, a clip of it, I don't care how you do it, to just people that you know in your state, post it on your socials, just get it out there. Change, it starts local, and that's for the good and the bad.